You're listening to the Mile Marker Podcast, where we explore trends and innovations in fleet automation and shared mobility, helping fleet-based businesses make better informed decisions and achieve full digital transformation. Welcome, everyone, to the Mile Marker Podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Partha Goswami, a strategist, futurist, and consultant specializing in emerging technology and disruption in the mobility industry. Partha analyzes evolving trends in automotive technology, monitors shifts in the value chain, and explores the startup ecosystem. His expertise spans wireless connectivity, safety, autonomous technology, and the transformation of automobiles into software-defined platforms. Partha has spoken at forums like Autotech, SAE, CVTA, and LA Automobility. Beyond work, he's an avid bird photographer who finds solace in nature. Welcome, Partha. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for the invite. And I'm really delighted to talk about all the changes happening in the mobility industry. It's really like the movie, everything everywhere happening at the same time.
It really is. It really is. And from the right side, we have Mark Thomas, EVP of Strategic Alliances and Marketing. Welcome, Mark. And so you have a really strong background in understanding emerging trends in the automotive industry. And as you kind of just mentioned there, it's kind of like everything is happening all at once. But what are some of the most significant trends that you've observed over the past decade or even just 5 years?
Yes. So the commonly used acronym that you use, CASE, CASE, C for connectivity, A for autonomous, S for software and services, and E for electrification. I think that describes the changes happening or the basic changes happening pretty well. However, the big change that I would draw attention to is really the transformation of the vehicle itself. The vehicle, instead of a one-off device, is really becoming a platform. It's being engineered totally differently. We'll talk more about it. And that has really given rise to the idea of software-defined vehicle. And I really think that's the biggest change happening in the industry right now.
And how is that affecting both, how consumers interact with their vehicles, but then also on the business model side, right? You've got the OEMs and even fleet companies that are having to kind of rethink how it's not just leasing a car or selling a car. Now you have all these other opportunities, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think consumers are really at the heart of this change because right from the day the first smartphone was introduced, consumers really were really delighted to see a device which is much more than what it is supposed to be, which is calling people, but it is really a platform for doing many different things. Number one, and number two, it continuously changes. Okay, it gets updated, right? So to a large extent, that particular consumer desire has been behind this particular transformation that we are seeing. Okay, more software centric product development, etc., that we are beginning to see the early first phases of that particular change. Your question was, okay, how is that affecting other things? And you mentioned fleet. Specifically, I think the fleet really is undergoing, the idea of fleet is really undergoing a big change. It used to be a very sleepy area. Typically, fleet means you have a contractor coming and he or she has a fleet of 20 vehicles, or maybe it's a big FedEx or some other company who has thousands of trucks, etc., but nothing more than that. But really, call it the Amazon effect, but really the idea of delivery has exploded. People's shopping has changed from actual physical shopping to online, and that has given rise to this idea of last mile delivery. And also, I would say there is a little bit of residual COVID effect where people got more used to get things delivered at their home. These are some of the impacts. These are not the only things. But so that's kind of number one, which is driving the market for fleets, right? But more importantly, fleet is no longer the sleepy, contractor's vehicle anymore. It's really very sophisticated machine, or it's going to become more sophisticated. Connectivity, complete end-to-end seamless data analytics. Those are becoming the hallmarks of fleet mobility, and that has given rise to this idea of fleet management and the whole new industry around it. So those are some of the big changes happening.
I have a question. So for the software-defined vehicles, I think of that more as the mobile phone or the consumer electronic companies changing the chip architecture that they're using. But fundamentally, the operating system, the interface, and how consumers experience those devices don't necessarily change unless maybe there's new feature capabilities that are enabled by going from one, the A1 or the M1 to the M2. What is the software-defined vehicle consumer experience, and how does that change? Because to me, it just seemed like streamlining manufacturing processes, establishing a common bus, and just making the cost of goods easier to manufacture vehicles.
Mhm. Okay. So let me first make a statement that a lot of people try to call a software-defined vehicle as smartphone on wheels. Okay, the real fact can be further than that. Okay, because the phone and the car, the vehicle, are very different objects. Okay, phone, if something fails, it's an annoyance. Okay, if the car fails, it's a life and death question, right? So certainly we are not trying to equate the two together. But coming back to the notion of what exactly is smart software defined vehicle, it's really the idea of separating the hardware from the software in the vehicle itself. So, and the manufacturing and all these other issues will come later. But let me start with the machine itself, the car itself. Okay, traditionally the way cars are designed, it's a one-off device, and all the electronics that goes into it, it comes as an embedded product. So you want to add some new function. Okay, you add a new computer to it, what we call ECU, um, electronic control unit. That comes as a self-contained black box. Okay, software is everything written, and then I need something else, I bring another of those black box. Okay, but the idea of this platform that I've been talking about earlier is really the where you separate the two. Okay, your hardware is there, and then all your software applications there, and then you have an operating system that connects the two. All right, and what that gives you, it gives you the idea that you are no longer selling a product which is fixed. Okay, your best car is the car on your very first day of purchase, but now I'm saying, because I have an underlying hardware which is decoupled, okay, I'm creating new services, new software, new functionality as I keep going forward. And that idea of continuous improvement, okay, is really the idea behind software defined vehicle. Now, all the other things that you mentioned is going to happen. How, as you manufacture them, the idea of streamlining the total manufacturing systems, very different from the existing system, is all going to happen. But the core idea in my mind is how the machine itself is getting re-engineered. That makes sense?
The over-the-air updates certainly allow you to debug the car and saves you trips into the dealership. But we used to have dealer visits to flash the firmware, things along that
Right.
line.
Mhm.
But you're saying that when the car is designed to take incremental, almost operating system upgrades, that you can do more of a Tesla experience, downloading a feature, for instance, that people pay for. So it's adding the capabilities to have a more modular experience ahead of actually having these modular experiences to sell.
Right. So, and like you said, when Tesla first released the Model S in 2012, that was really the key value proposition of the product. Okay, it was because consumers did not see what's inside the car. They didn't really open the hood and got to know all the details. But what they saw was, they woke up on a certain morning and said, "Oh my goodness, my suspension settings have changed." Okay, and that's a huge exciter for the customers, and that's what they kept talking about, and that got the notice of most other car makers. They said, somehow we have to get to that particular stage. And it's easier said than done, because you can do it in one shot, but then how do you scale it up for your entire portfolio of millions of cars? That's where really the trick
11 years
lies.
later, they're still trying to do this?
Yeah, and I think the scaling up and wanting to do it, those are probably the two big issues. Because I have worked in General Motors, and honestly, I was part of the Volt, the product, the development team for Chevy Volt. And believe it or not, back in, when was it? Maybe 2008. My test car was getting regular software updates as it was being developed. Okay, and I would get a note, that keep the car, in an area where it can get the signal. It was not based on Wi-Fi, and so we are getting updates. The thing was, what GM did not do, it did not scale up that capability, number one. And number two, it did not really use that capability for upgrading the product. Okay, it was used internally for making a lot of improvements. So it was not necessarily the lack of capability. I think it was something else, right? But again, I think now the industry is at a point where this is not looked as a novelty anymore. Everybody is doing it, and we'll continue to see more and more of it going forward.
If you're talking from the consumer side, it obviously raises up the sort of data privacy issue, which is a whole other podcast, right? But from whether it's a consumer vehicle or a fleet vehicle, because you have the ability to do software updates and continuously upgrading the vehicle, that means that potentially, fleet or consumer, their vehicle lasts longer, right? Because it's, they're getting new features from a fleet standpoint. Maybe it's more safety features. Maybe it's how to, stay engaged with the driver, or, having better read on the status of the vehicle, and does the driver need to go and switch out the vehicle. So can you talk a little bit about how that might change, I guess, the longevity of a vehicle, like the vehicle life cycle management of it, where, instead of, that you're going to have to switch out a car every 10 years, you might get 12 years out of it, or maybe even longer, and how that affects things.
Yeah. So there are actually two sides of this question. One is the physical longevity of the vehicle. Okay. I mean, everything falls apart after a certain time, but we are talking about physical longevity. That's one thing. Okay. And the other thing is actually the freshness of the product. Okay. So when you talk about software defined vehicle, we are actually talking more about the latter. Okay. I think the auto industry is at a point where gone are the days where the car would fall apart after 2-3 years. Everything is pretty rugged and reliable. So I think the basic quality, basic reliability is a lot higher than it used to be. Number one. But what we are looking at is the car is no longer stale. I think I mentioned that in a traditional hardware centric vehicle, the best day of the vehicle is the day one. Okay, when all the features are there, and then nothing is added on. But now, because of my capability to use software to either update a feature or add new feature or reconfigure an old feature, whatever that be, okay, I can achieve all three periodically over time of the ownership. So to a owner, first owner, second owner, or whatever that be, he or she will continue to see new features over time. So I think that's probably the best, or the more important impact of this new vehicle development, or what we call software defined vehicle.
And along these same lines, some of the things that you've talked about in your writings, or in your speeches that you've given at different events, data standardization has been something that you've touched on. Can you talk about that a little bit, and kind of where are we at with that, and what are kind of the struggles, and do you see it actually the manufacturers actually agreeing on it, and sort of data standardization?
Yeah. So so far until now, every car company generates its data, because we have tons of sensors in the car, and there are a lot of data that comes out of the car, right? But every car company almost does it in a proprietary way. Okay, I have my own data formats. Okay, somebody else has their own data formats, and that there's a big issue, because if I now want some third party to develop application for me, okay, I need a very specific customized application development. Okay, but look at the entire Apple ecosystem or the entire Android ecosystem. You are a developer, you can develop it for your Apple or for your entire Android ecosystem, because you know exactly what the data formats are, what the APIs are. There's no issue. You know what data you can use for whatever functions. The same has not been the case. So I think there is an acknowledgement that we need to standardize our data formats across the industry, across all car companies. Okay, and that is happening right now. Okay, there is a specific consortium called Covisa, Connected Vehicle, whatever, I
Right.
forget the acronym right now.
Mm.
And they are developing something called vehicle VSS, vehicle signal specification, which is essentially a common taxonomy of data. Okay, if I call a particular data whatever BOD, it's BOD everywhere. Okay, for everybody in the industry, whoever is developing, that's happening right now. Now the question is, how is the car industry uh, handling the idea of this whole the software defined vehicle and all these new functions that I'll develop and I'll monetize that, because now I have so much data at my disposal. I can create these new functions that I will offer to the consumers. I think that is not happening yet. All right. And the main challenge is, one of the main challenges is the standardization of data. Okay, which again is being addressed by some of this consortium. So that has to happen. Okay. However, the auto industry probably went ahead of itself. Okay, and maybe around 2016-17, we heard a lot of announcements that we are going to have a complete new stream of monetization because we have so much data at our disposal. The fact of the matter is, industry really hasn't learned yet how to extract the data, how to do the analytics, and how to create the apps based on data, and so on and so forth. So 2016, McKinsey wrote an article that this whole new database economy is going to be $800 billion. Nothing happened. 2021, they came back and says, well, there are these issues that why it's not happening, and it's probably the market is probably going to be much less, maybe $400 billion. We are at 2024 now. This still hasn't happened. Few companies came about, companies like Wejo, Autonomo. They were basically designed as data brokers. Okay, and they actually were set up to kind of data broker the data, but that wasn't enough to scale their business. Okay, so at some point in time they have to fold their business, right? So hopefully we are at a point everybody understands all the challenges and the weaknesses, and we have consortiums like Visa that's helping to create a more standardized data taxonomy. So I'm very hopeful that in the next few years we'll make a lot more progress in creating the solutions that we need to create this new database, new business monetization, whatever you call it, new functions, new experience.
But I think people don't have to wait for there to be a data standard and then the OEMs to switch to this new data standard. There's certainly several companies now that provide data normalization and cleansing services. So you just call them and say, what's the current fuel level reading? And they will provide it back in a standard answer, no matter which make and model that vehicle is. So the good news is we can solve it with private entrepreneurship, because it does take a long time to hit the standardization of a lingua franca for vehicles.
No, absolutely. And as I said, just because you are proprietary doesn't mean you are limited. So it's not like the car companies or their suppliers are sitting there and doing nothing. A lot is being done. There are companies who are offering what they call function on demand, where you can order some function after the post purchase, and it can be added. GM, etc. In particular, they have a feature called the level 2 autonomous. I think the one from GM is called Super Cruise. The one from Ford is called Blue Cruise, and other companies have other similar functions. And those things you can actually don't have to have them right at during your purchase. You can buy them later. It can be triggered, it can be activated, it can be deactivated. So there are things happening, but the explosion that it was envisioned back in 2016, that explosion hasn't happened.
When I also think of data, I also think of, the utilization and the action that you take from the data, right? Like you can have all this data coming from all these vehicles, but if there's no way to quickly turn it around into, let's say, some automations or, triggers for, they're going into this part of town and, I don't know, there's a roadblock, and so we should automatically reroute them or something. I mean, very kind of off the top of my head example, but I just feel like there's also the action part of it. I feel like the Wejo and the Autonomos, it was volumes and volumes of data, but there wasn't a lot of action behind it. So I think that was part of what was missing as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Certainly. So that is the other part, right? You get the data, but what do you do with it? What kind of analytics you use and what kind of new innovation you create out of that, right? I think that's the part that was missing. Now, individually, car companies are doing bits and pieces of that. There's something called usage-based insurance, UBI, that many car companies have been doing for a while. Essentially, the idea that if I provide certain data, hopefully with permission of the consumer, and then that can impact their hopefully positively if the driver is more conservative in driving, and that they can get a better deal. That's the idea behind usage-based insurance, right? And there are businesses that are slowly evolving in that direction. So there are bits and pieces of that's happening, but in a bigger sense, that the car generates, it's a hotbed of so many interesting data. What do I do with it? How can I create new services, new functions, new
So
features, new experience?
the heuristic, if they were to learn from the transformation of web and .com to the mobile revolution, the companies that created services optimized for mobile and using the mobile only technologies were those that succeeded. So for instance, MapQuest, where we were just used to printing things out and holding them up in the car because there was no GPS on your laptop or your desktop, gave way to Google Maps and having folks navigate themselves around. MySpace gave way to Instagram because of the camera. And the concept then for vehicles is, what are the unique new sensors that the vehicles have that you don't have on your phone? Because you're not going to pay for a Netflix subscription so you can watch it on your screen when you can just cast what you have on your phone to the back screens, or just watch it on a tablet. So the usage-based insurance is a great example. It knows your driving style. It knows whether you're speeding. It knows how many miles that you're driving. And so those become examples. Other services that only the vehicle may know about would be services that can help you understand your battery health. Predictive maintenance is a service that's no longer about scheduled maintenance, but maintenance based upon the specific wear and tear of that vehicle. So we should be looking at what are the data streams that are both unique to the vehicle and valuable, because trying to replicate what a person has on their phone on a screen in the dash is a surefire recipe for not selling very many of those consumer services.
100%. That's why I say car is not a smartphone on wheels,
Right.
And there are many unique, in fact, there are too many unique sets of data that gets generated from the everyday driving, road condition. Okay. How my, if I'm, if the cars are braking too much, maybe there is traffic backup. If my car is skidding, I'm getting a lot of reports of skidding. Okay.
Right.
Maybe there is black ice forming.
When the wipers go on, guess what? It's raining. Microclimate information,
Exactly.
right?
Yep. So those are some common examples, but you can expand that into many, many other potential use cases that you can get all from all these different sensors in the vehicle. And also not just the vehicle itself, but also people. Okay, what our behaviors are. So there are two parts, right? One, what car is seeing, what the car is experiencing, what the consumers or the drivers or the passengers, they are experiencing, how they are behaving. Okay, what kind of music you listen to your vehicle. Okay, and how that can be personalized for a better in-car experience. Do you prefer a certain light ambient lighting color in your vehicle, or those might be trivial, but if when you look at the whole gamut of possibilities, you actually can offer a much richer, personalized in-cabin experience.
Right. So before we wrap up, I know that you recently created a detailed perspective on 12 key trends in
Mhm.
the broader mobility and transportation industry. Can you
Mhm.
highlight just a few? And I think we may have touched on them in this conversation, but wanted to have you highlight a couple of the most important ones that you felt were good to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. So let me start with this. We talked about this user experience, right? So one of the things I talk about, I have 12 trends, by the way, in this entire report. So of those 12, one is what I call the incoming user experience. Okay, how the cockpit is transforming. Because in my opinion, today's cockpit essentially is not a whole lot different than what it was 30 years back. Okay, and over time, as new technology came, they got thrown into the car. The car cockpit became a kitchen sink. Okay, we need another function, edit. We need another alert, edit, edit, right? So it came to a point that it become overwhelming for the consumer, even though we have added a lot of new supporting technologies or new displays, touch controls, and so on and so forth. But it still basically became too much cramped into one place, right? So one of the themes that how do change that user experience to something which is a lot more designed around the driver or the passenger. Okay, so this idea of less is more. Okay, and how less is enough and how less is too less, those are the things we are seeing many different examples of, people are trying. But that's another big trend, really developing the cockpit experience around the driver, what I call immersive UX, user experience, right? We are beginning to see many examples, and that's a whole discussion that we can spend a whole hour talking about that. But that's kind of one trend I talk about. The other is actually more like a much broader, which is a supply chain. So, today the car industry is really a pyramid, okay, where the car manufacturer sits at the top, and then we have the tiered structure, tier one supplier, tier two suppliers, etc., tier three, etc. If you're a technology company, you might be a tier three or tier four, right? But with entire technological changes happening, we are seeing, for example, the big technology companies like Qualcomm, like Nvidia, like Google, whoever, they are engaging more directly with the car industry. Okay, in some cases they are acting as big tier one suppliers. At the same time, smaller players who may have a particular technology to offer, they are working directly with the car companies in many cases. Okay, so this whole supply chain structure is really undergoing a huge change. I would say it's getting dismantled, of course, almost. In case of a pyramid, it's becoming more of a network. So those are two kind of, one is a car centric change, UX, new immersive user experience, and the other is this whole idea of a complete change of supply chain from a pyramid to a network.
Well, I'm from a, as a driver, the whole user experience of the driver, I hope that more car companies do put more into that, because my current vehicle and some other vehicles I've been in, I really wonder if there was anybody behind the user experience development
Mhm.
of the vehicle. So it's
Mhm.
hopefully that you're right, and there will be a lot more in that research and investment in that area. So well,
Yeah,
very good.
I hope so.
So we like to wrap up all of our episodes with a lightning round, if you're up for that.
Sure.
Fun questions. Okay.
Mhm.
So your favorite city or place to visit, or perhaps a favorite place for bird watching and photography?
Yes, these days I see everything through the eye of my lens, right? I was recently in Costa Rica, and I've been really completely blown by that country and the biodiversity of that country. Okay, it's so much, it's such a small place, so many different wildlife, and in my case birds. So certainly this is probably my most favorite place right now. I'm planning to go back again. And in fact, not just Costa Rica, but the countries around that. Colombia is another target of mine. So yeah, those are the two my most likely next visit place.
Excellent. Well, if you go to Colombia, you have to have the ceviche. It's to die for there. It really is.
Okay. Okay.
Well, what is your favorite bird and why?
All birds are my favorite, but I have a particular soft corner for something I see in my backyard every day. It's the common cardinal, and the reason I have a particular soft corner for the bird is because I live in Michigan, and although Michigan is not that much of a severe winter state, but we have our gray, dull, and trees without leaves, that kind of days for an extended period. And the only splash of color I see is from the cardinals. So they provide that extremely important touch of color in my gray winter days.
Very nice. We don't get cardinals out here in California, really, or at least I've never really seen one. So yeah, you're very lucky to have those there. Have you ever driven electric, or do you have an EV?
I currently do not have an EV, but I have driven many of them. In fact, GM's first electric car, which was a range extender, Chevy Volt, is a car that I worked hands-on for a number of years. I was the technology planner for that product, so I have driven Volt extensively. Had it in my garage for an extended period of time. Chevy Bolt, which is a different, completely different car, also an electric car, of course, I have driven, and a whole bunch of other cars, including Teslas, because we always had that in our fleets.
Mm-hmm. And what about an autonomous vehicle? Have you ever ridden in one?
I haven't. I don't think there is an autonomous car anywhere in the world today, so I haven't driven that. But I have ridden. I have taken rides in many autonomous vehicles, pilot vehicles. In particular, at CES, I've been like the Lyft and Aptiv had their joint project where you could actually take you call the car and then it comes, and of course it had a driver. And so we have taken rounds in that. In as recent as last CES, Umbrella, a company from California, they had their test car, which was again partially autonomous. So yes, I have driven, and the shuttles, a lot of shuttles, going back many years, 7-8 years, Navias, and IBM had something called Ollie. Those have all disappeared, by the way. Yes, I have taken rides in most of them, many of them.
Well, I know San Francisco, Waymo is there. I know Mark's
Yeah.
ridden in them. I haven't yet. I just haven't had the opportunity. And I will say I'm still a little bit apprehensive to do so, but everyone that has done it has.
I know our
has said
next team building activity.
I think you'll be fine. I'm hearing more or less positive reports
Right.
back from that. However, I would say that we are not ready for completely where we can give the controls completely back to the vehicle 100%. I think we are still far from that particular goal. So
I
yeah,
would
so I have
agree.
my reservation, but again, I will be very happy to ride one next time when I visit.
And big picture question here: will we ever be a fully electric society?
I don't think so, and here is the reason: because electric is one propulsion system that helps us get to a pollution-free society, but that's certainly not the only solution. So we'll probably see that hydrogen has a place, maybe not for your everyday car, but for heavy-duty trucks, okay, which needs a large amount of stored energy, and they have their that their paths are relatively straightforward. So this whole charging issue that is one bottleneck right now for wider adoption of electric cars doesn't necessarily apply to those type of vehicles. But we still are not there in terms of having hydrogen centric trucks. But I believe that we'll have a mix of the solution. But electric car would be a large part of that.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Partha. This has been a wonderful conversation, and thanks to all our listeners as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Mile Marker Podcast. If you liked what you heard today, give us a like, share this episode on social media, and even take a minute to give us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you can join us for future episodes full of insights and ideas to keep the mobility industry moving forward.